Welcome to the Way Podcast, episode 1.
Episode 1, baby.
kind of an episode 1.
Kind of an episode 1.
Yeah.
Today we wanted to talk about God and how to hear Him, how to talk to Him, how to incorporate Him into your life, because as Daniel and I have started trying to walk closer with God and trying to make the right decision every day in our life, it's incredibly hard to do so without God. It's almost impossible to live life, honestly, without hearing God.
Yeah, it's kind of...
And we want to teach everyone, at least we want to describe how we hear Him. Everyone's going to hear Him in a different way. But once you start to hear Him and ask to hear Him more, it's not going to stop. So I would proceed with caution, because once you start to hear God, it's hard to get Him out of your mind.
I would caveat, maybe not proceed with caution, proceed with full knowledge.
Proceed with full knowledge.
Because I wouldn't say be cautious about hearing God. Hearing God is a wonderful and it's a beautiful thing. It's more about fully recognizing that you will hear God and that He will be present and that He will start talking to you and asking you to do things that you never maybe thought about before, or that might seem a little bit intimidating to you at times.
Yeah.
So
I guess for me, as Daniel will say later, and probably as you heard in his testimony, Dan has always been able to hear God fairly clearly in his life. His mom taught him from a young age. It was super great, and he's led his life always asking God first what to do, and the times that he doesn't ask God what to do, bad things happen, right?
All this shit goes down.
But me growing up, I didn't really have a basis. I didn't really grow up knowing that you could have a relationship of like talking to God on a daily basis. Didn't really read the Bible much growing up. Just kind of went to mass once a week. Got exposed to God at like youth group and worship service and whatnot. But all I knew was like I would get shivers if we sang a song, or like I heard a specific message. I never really knew what God's voice sounded like in my life. So if we go back to my testimony, my family leaves, and I'm trying to hear God, right? And I'm hearing all these different things. I'm hearing my voice, I'm hearing what I think is God's voice, and I'm hearing another voice. And, I start reading the Bible. And the first thing I notice is that, like, all these prophets that are hearing from God, because that's where I wanted to go, is like, how did all these other prophets hear from God? They're hearing Him really clearly. They're speaking to other people about what God's saying. We have the Holy Spirit now, so, like, everyone can hear God if we just allow Him to come into our lives. And it's like, how can I get that? And the big thing that I saw as I was starting to read the Bible more and more is that these prophets would go out and fast, and they would go into the wilderness, right? They would climb up a mountain and be by themselves and hear God. And so my biggest goal when my family left was like, I got to hear God so that He can tell me what to do, so that I can have my family back. That was like all I wanted, was to hear God so I could get my family back, because if I follow what God tells me to do, right, nothing can go wrong.
Yes.
And so I thought I was following God. There was a point in time where I was really depressed. I was still working at the big pest control Ecolab job, and I was struggling with pornography and whatnot, and I thought, I got to get all this technology out of my way so that I can hear God better. I got to get all these other distractions, TV, friends, all these distractions were just in my way of hearing God, and I need to hear God so I can get my family back. So I had this really extreme plan of like, and I actually almost went through with this. I decided to give all my money away to my ex-fiance and her kid. By the way, no one knew that I was going to do this, not even her. I just put like a check with all my money in a diaper bag as we were passing off my daughter that day. She didn't know what was going on. I left a little note with my will and testimony, and my plan was I found a place out in California where I thought, it's near water, it's got, I can hunt for food. I got all this survival gear a couple months prior. I got all packed up, right, and I'm like, okay, I'm ready to go. I'm going to go out into the wilderness. I'm going to be able to hear God. There's not going to be any distractions. and he's going to tell me what to do. He's going to give me my action plan, and I'm going to come back looking like a prophet, being able to just, rock it, being all Jesus-y, all godly and stuff. And I start going on this trip. I kind of mentioned it to Daniel at a party offhand, and he thought I was joking.
I thought he was crazy.
He thought I was crazy.
We were talking, and he was just kind of telling me what he was going to do, and I was like, bro, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
Right. And
just
yeah, he didn't take it very seriously, and we were not friends. We were not friends at the time. So
both he thought I was crazy for being
so Jesus-y.
And I thought he was crazy
for being so worldly.
I don't even know if I go there.
Yeah, I was a douche. But anyways, so I had this elaborate plan. I'm gonna go out to so I start driving out to California, and it's like a 12-hour drive, and I made it all in one night. I didn't stop anywhere. I stopped one place for food because I was like, this is gonna be my last civilized meal. I stopped at a Carl's Jr. Gotta eat right before you go off into the wilderness. I gave my baby mama all of my money that I had except for $1,000. I kept $1,000 for myself so that I could have enough gas, have enough money to get there, and then also enough money for when I finally was told to go back with God. So I stop off at this Carl's Jr. It's the first time I'm taking a stop, first time I'm not listening to music on this whole trip thing, or first time I'm really having some quiet time. And I get in the Carl's Jr., I order my food, I go to the bathroom, I'm patiently eating my meal, I'm not taking it out to I sit down and eat, and I get this other thought, and I think this thought was from God, not from the enemy, because the other voice I learned later, as I started learning what God's voice sounded like, the other voice was from the enemy. It was from my fear, it was from my insecurities and whatnot.
We should caveat that when you're praying, when you're trying to discern what to do, there's always three voices in your head. There's your thoughts, there's God's trying to speak to you, and then there's the devil trying to lead you astray. And so, in this case, Ben hasn't quite learned yet in his journey what God's voice really fully sounds like. And when you don't know that, it can be sometimes a little bit hard, and that's definitely why you want to have someone else while you're praying and you're learning how to hear God's voice to kind of talk to and learn from, because the devil can trick you a little bit and sound like God sometimes, and get you to do things that maybe you shouldn't be doing.
Right. And so for the first time, I had been listening to this other voice that I thought was God for a few months, and it sounded like it was God because he told me to read the Bible. He told me, all the prophet, so I was like, this got to be God, right? The devil can twist scripture, as we'll get into later. But
the devil also, he plays the long game in the sense that he will sometimes encourage you to things that are things that you should be doing to get you to make a mistake further down the line. I don't know if you guys have, but I read the Screw Tape Letters a couple times, and in the Screw Tape Letters, it's a story about, it's written by C.S. Lewis, fabulous author, and he, it's from the perspective of a head devil to a lower devil, talking about how to lead his human astray, and it's basically encouraging him to do certain things that lead him almost to God, but not quite. Right. Almost to God and not quite.
Right.
And so, sorry, keep going with your story.
Yeah,
I just wanted to throw that in there.
I hear this voice, and it's like, you're not supposed to do this. And so I'm freaking out, right? Because I had all this plan. I just gave away all. Yeah, I got all the way there. No one knows I'm doing this. I've got $1,000 to my name. I've given everything else over to the baby mama, and I get in my car. And one of the things that I first did when I started hearing God the first time was just I would flip open my Bible because I didn't know where to go to hear God. And so I was in my car and I was flipping open the Bible. I'm like, God, give me an answer, give me an answer, give me an answer. And I didn't see anything that helped me in my situation. I just kept flipping over, and it's like, this has no context. So God really just kind of said that to me in the Carl's Jr. and then left me to make my own decision. And through my gut feeling, I was like, I'm not supposed to be here. So I turned back around, drove 12 hours back. I'm thinking, okay, if God's telling me to go back, it means he's going to do something right away, right? I don't know what I'm going to tell my parents. I don't know what I'm going to tell my baby mama, but something is going to happen if God's telling me to turn around already. And I get back to my house, and my father greets me, and things go good, and they receive me back. And my baby mama gives me back about half my money that I gave to her, because she didn't want it anyway. She didn't know I was doing the thing. Like, she didn't care about that. But anyways, that was like the start of my learning how to hear God thing. Is like, I just didn't know how to hear him. So a few more months passed by. I don't have a job anymore because I quit Ecolab like a day before I went on this journey, and I just have like a whole month where I'm like trying to figure out God. And then I come across this guy on YouTube. We'll talk about him later, but like, he would become my spiritual mentor for the next 2 years. I still talk with him as often as I can, and that's where I really learned how to hear God. He taught me how to read the Bible, how to dissect it, how to like apply it to my life. He had me write down the 10 Commandments and sign it at the end. So the first thing I learned hearing God is just like knowing what the 10 Commandments are, and then if you're making a decision and you're not quite sure what God wants you to do, if you're trying to make a decision and it goes against one of the 10 Commandments, then it's probably not a decision you should make, because the 10 Commandments are pretty solid. They're pretty secure. It's things that God says not to do. So that was how I first started how to hear God. It was like, should I do this thing? Does it go against one of the 10 Commandments? No, it doesn't. This is a good decision. So I'd make it even if it's not necessarily something God's directly telling me to do. Or, oh, this doesn't go with the 10 Commandments. I shouldn't do. And then from there, I would start to actually hear a little voice every once in a while.
Well, and the other thing is that this is something that I'm growing in, is reading the Bible. But in talking to Ben and us talking about how we hear God, is something that Ben's always said, is that he hears God when he reads the Bible. Mm-hmm. Like, God speaks to him when he reads the Bible. So it's, when you're just starting out, living by the 10 Commandments, but just finding quiet time, because I think that the key to hearing God is it's in the peace. In I guess Isaiah. One of the prophets, I can't remember right now off the top of my head, but he goes to the top of a mountain. He's like, there's the storm and there's the wind. Elijah, thank you.
King. First King.
It was
Yeah. Sorry.
And he thinks that God's going to be in all of the noise, all of the thunder, all the big moments, but God is in the quiet, the peace, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that that's the thing from Ben's story, right? He thought he was going to hear God in the big moment. He thought he was going to hear God if he went out to the wilderness. He did all these big things, right? But it was in the moment of silence that he took at Carl's Jr., weirdest place ever, right? But in that moment of peace, right, that when he finally rested, that God could speak to him, that he could hear him. So I think it's not that God doesn't speak to us in the big things, because he does. It's that God is always speaking to us, but we can hear him best when we are silent. I know from my personal experience, when I try to hear God, that I have to quiet myself, and I specifically have to quiet my internal self. I've gotten to a point where I can definitely, even in loud or busy situations, there's still times, like in the grocery store or in a large group, that I can still hear God in busy moments. It's the busyness that's inside me. How much have I sinned recently? Have I been to confession? How anxious? All of that internal stuff for me is very noisy. And so that's the stuff that I try to quiet. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, that's a good point. Like, God doesn't often talk to us in big ways, and it can be really annoying, because like sometimes you're like, I need an answer right now, and I need it to be really obvious. Like, my big thing on my big journey was like, if I didn't know what God wanted me to do in a big obvious way, I just wouldn't do anything, and I wouldn't take any action, and that gets you nowhere. You got to make mistakes. You got to, you kind of figure out what God's voice is by like just doing things.
God calls us to work in the little ways. Ben and I were talking about this the other day. Is that our lives are like a field. It's like in that you plant. You have to plant the seed. You have to till the soil. You have to water this, right? Weed. You have to do all of the grunge work, all of the little things, and then the fruit comes. God doesn't just bring you the fruit right when you ask for it. You have to put in all the legwork, and that fruit isn't always what you think it's going to be when it happens either.
Right. Yeah, and so planting those seeds with God and spending time with Him is probably the most important thing, because in John 10, like 27 or something, it says that my sheep hear my voice and they follow me, and I know them. If we don't know who God is, then we're not going to know when He's speaking to us. So you have to plant those seeds of time with Him, because it's really like learning a whole another language. Like, you're speaking with someone who's speaking with you telepathically. He'll speak with you through, like, I've noticed God will speak to me a lot through Daniel. He'll speak through other people. He'll speak through music. Like, God speaks to you all the time, but you have to be aware of what His language is, and it changes all the time. Like, it used to be I would flip open the Bible and God would speak to me. Yeah, it still happens, but it's not as often anymore because my relationship is much deeper. I don't just flip the Bible open anymore. I kind of know where to go, and so I'll meditate over a scripture now versus like, I don't know what to do. I'll just flip the Bible.
Right.
I don't know what to do. I'm going to call my spiritual mentor. Like, I'm kind of in a place now where I can hear God. I'm much more mature in my hearing of God. The other thing I wanted to say real quick, it sounds like you have something.
You go for it. No.
In the Bible, I don't remember a specific verse. It says that God's ways are higher than our ways. His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. So like, I guess just again, like, God, the way God speaks to us is not going to be in the way that we're necessarily going to be looking for. He's normally not going to speak to you audibly. He's going to speak to you in a way that's different because He is different. He just communicates through everything, and you have to constantly be looking for that.
I've only once in my life heard audible words from God. Once. Every other time it's an internal voice. Mm-hmm. And honestly, like Ben said, God speaks to me through Ben all the time. We were in the chapel one time praying back in the probably November or December of this last year, and I was internally asking God, I want to do this thing that internally I knew was kind of wrong. And Ben just out of the blue goes, he said something along. I said,
sometimes there's things that we have to do
that God asks us to do that we don't
want to do.
And I was like, holy crap.
Yeah.
He literally answered my thing through this guy sitting right next to me. And Ben had no idea what I was thinking in my head.
No, but I knew God wanted me to say it because He was like, you need to say this. Right? I was like, why? We didn't even say anything. We were just sitting there in silence. Yeah. And God was like, you need to say this. I was like, okay. So, and then Danny was like, dang it.
Yeah, that was a fun conversation.
It was a fun conversation.
The important thing is to definitely take that first step, and to spend time in prayer. If there's a chapel, that's a great place to go. Find someplace quiet and someplace that's designated as prayer space, right? If you can make that happen. Like I live in an apartment, but I try to not pray in my apartment. I try to go pray at a chapel because it's a outward sign for me and my body and my mind that like this is prayer time, this is Bible time, or this is rosary time, or whatever I'm doing. The other thing is have someone to walk with. Either they're walking in the same place as you, or they're a little ahead of you and they can help you learn, or both. Ben and I are very similar where we are in our faith. Different places we're farther ahead and farther behind, but that helps. We pull each other along in certain areas. But both of us, like he mentioned, he has, I would say, a spiritual director, and I do as well, that I work with on a weekly basis. And it's important to have someone in your life who is a little bit farther, maybe a little bit older than you, who you're able to bounce things off into, who's able to ask you questions and pull you and give you new ideas about ways to engage in your faith.
Yeah.
Whether that's your youth minister, your campus minister, your mom, your dad. My mom was a huge, huge role model for me. Like I said in my testimony, huge role model for me growing up. And my dad became one as I grew in my faith. My mom's faith was very much fire, and it was really easy to connect with right off the bat. But my dad's faith ran really, really, really deep, and it was very steady. And so as you grow in your faith, you find different needs for different kinds of faith, a different relationship with God. Like Ben said, he doesn't hear God the same way he used to.
Yeah. No, it's definitely developed. Another thing that really helped me on my pathway to hearing God better, and this is one of the times I've heard God audibly, maybe not audibly, a really loud inner voice that I knew for sure wasn't me, and it was a different voice. I've heard him a few times. One of those times I was sitting in my apartment. It was like early in the morning. God had woken me up to pray, and I was sitting there, and I was reading Exodus at the time, so I opened it up to the part where it says that Moses was speaking to God as a friend, and I was reading that and meditating on it, and I wanted so much to be able to just like be able to hear God all the time. I wanted to be his friend, and so I was like, God, please speak to me as a friend. Help me to be your friend so that I can hear you better. And I heard, how are you? And then immediately I was like, oh, I'm doing really good. And I didn't hear anything else that day. But it's happened a few times where it's like, sometimes instead of God telling me what to do, he'll actually just ask, like, how are you? And God, that's the fun thing about prayer. A lot of us think that it's like a chore. You got to schedule out of your day. You got to try and do it at a time where you're not hanging out with your friends or your girlfriend or doing other, playing video games, right? And it can be really a chore sometimes starting out. But as you get into it, if you really allow it to, God will always be God to you, and he'll always be superior. But it turns from less of a God thing and more of like he actually really does become your friend.
He wants a relationship.
And he wants a relationship with you, and that's the ultimate goal in this life because you got to be friends with God if you want to get into heaven. Because newsflash, when you get to heaven, you're going to be spending all your time with God. And so if you don't get to know him down here and you don't like him down here, then you won't want to be in heaven. Because so if you really want to have a good time with it, don't look at it as a chore. It's going to start out as a chore, and I still have hard times sometimes because it's not always, God doesn't just speak to me all the time audibly. Sometimes you're sitting there and you're expecting to hear something, and it's like, oh, did I just waste an hour of my time? But God's there every second waiting for you to spend that hour with him. And
hour, 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
He wants
anything.
He wants your time.
Anything. And I promise you that if you look at it from a friend perspective and like getting to know that person better, the person being God, you will start to hear God more in your life, and you'll start to enjoy prayer more. And then you'll just hear him all the time, not just when you're in prayer. It'll be when you're with your friends. It'll be when you're reading the Bible. It'll be when you're doing other things, and it'll just be like you have a friend there all the time. And it's super awesome.
Yeah. I'm like always, if you have questions or we didn't necessarily go as in depth in a certain area, leave comments. We want to know questions that might come up.
There's so much more we can talk about on it. Like we could probably sit here and talk for another hour the thing. Like I've been talked to by God in dreams.
We'll probably do another video more in depth later. For sure.
There's so much more we can talk about. But please leave your comments. We'd love to get more in depth. This is just kind of a vague overview of like beginner's guide to like hearing God.
A little bit of how to hear God in the beginning. So absolutely comments, questions. If you guys have things that you want to hear us talk about, leave that in there too. We're just starting out, so just figuring out.
Yeah, we're still getting into the real.
What we're going to talk. Yeah.
So thank you so much for tuning in, and have a great night.